There is a moment in airline history that captures everything about what Southwest Airlines was built to be. It is 1971. Southwest Airlines is brand new, flying three Boeing 737s between Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio in Texas. The company is hemorrhaging money. After a few months of operation, the leadership realizes they cannot afford to keep all three aircraft. The math is simple and brutal. 4 aircraft are needed to maintain the schedule, 3 are available, and the option of cutting routes is off the table because the routes are the whole business. The solution the operations team devised was not to cut the schedule. It was to turn one aircraft around faster. The 10-minute turnaround, getting a plane from touchdown to takeoff in 10 minutes against an industry standard of 30 to 45 minutes, became the operational signature of Southwest Airlines. It was born not from a desire to innovate, but from the simple fact that the company had no money and no choice. That story encapsulates something important about Southwest. Its model was not designed in a business school or developed through strategic consulting engagements. It was forged under pressure, improvised from necessity, and then systematized into competitive advantage through decades of consistent execution. For 47 consecutive years, from its first profitable year in 1973 through 2019, Southwest Airlines recorded a profit. 47 years. In an industry notorious for cyclical losses, bankruptcies, and the casual destruction of shareholder value, one airline turned a profit every single year through oil shocks, recessions, the September 11 attacks, the 2008 financial crisis, and multiple competitive upheavals. This is the story of how that model worked, what made it different, and what happened when it finally broke. Southwest was founded in 1967 by Herb Kelleher, a lawyer, and Rollin King, an entrepreneur, based on a concept King sketched on a cocktail napkin, connecting the three largest cities in Texas with low-cost, high-frequency air service. The idea was not original in concept. Pacific Southwest Airlines in California had been running a similar intrastate model since the 1940s. What was original was the ferocity with which Kelleher pursued and defended it. Before Southwest flew a single passenger, it fought for the right to exist. Braniff Airways and Texas International Airlines, recognizing that a low-cost intrastate competitor would undercut their pricing on Texas routes, launched a multi-year legal campaign to prevent Southwest from operating. The legal battle lasted from 1967 to 1971, consuming most of Southwest's initial capital and testing Kelleher's commitment so severely that the company nearly died before it started. Kelleher won, and the fight shaped his approach to running Southwest in ways that persisted for decades. He understood that the incumbents would always try to kill Southwest. He understood that the only sustainable defense was a cost structure so low that the incumbents could not profitably match Southwest's prices without destroying their own economics. Every decision made at Southwest, about aircraft, about operations, about labor, about the customer experience, was evaluated through the lens of cost. The single aircraft type decision was the first and most consequential expression of this philosophy. Southwest operated only Boeing 737s, not 737s and 727s, not 737s and Airbus A320s, only 737s, exclusively, from 1971 through the present. This choice, radical in an era when airlines prided themselves on diverse fleets that matched aircraft size to route demand, generated cost savings that compounded across every aspect of operations. Every Southwest pilot was type rated on one aircraft, not two, not three, one. The training costs were dramatically lower than competitors who had to maintain certifications across multiple fleet types. Pilots could be assigned to any route because every route used the same aircraft. Scheduling flexibility increased. Every Southwest mechanic worked on one aircraft type. Parts inventory was simplified. One set of spare parts covered the entire fleet. Maintenance expertise was deep and focused rather than spread across multiple platforms. When a technical issue arose with the 737, Southwest's mechanics had worked on nothing else and understood the aircraft thoroughly. Every Southwest gate was configured for the 737. Ground equipment was standardized. Catering equipment was standardized. The operational choreography of turning around an aircraft, which Southwest had refined to an extraordinary precision, was the same at every station in the network. The cost savings from fleet standardization were not small. Southwest has estimated at various points that operating a single fleet type saves hundreds of millions of dollars annually compared to a comparable multi-fleet operation. Over decades, the compounding effect of this decision represents a structural cost advantage that competitors could not easily replicate without rebuilding their entire operations from the ground up. The Southwest model extended from aircraft selection into every dimension of the operation in ways that consistently prioritized speed, simplicity, and cost. Point-to-point routing rather than hub and spoke was a foundational choice. Traditional airlines routed passengers through central hubs. Connecting flights through Atlanta or Chicago or Dallas-Fort Worth allowed airlines to serve smaller markets with less frequency by combining traffic from multiple origins. The hub model enabled network reach but introduced complexity, connection times, transfer infrastructure, the vulnerability of delays cascading through a hub to disrupt dozens of onward flights. Southwest flew primarily point-to-point, Dallas to Chicago, Chicago to Denver, Denver to Phoenix. No connection required, no hub dependency. The model meant Southwest didn't serve every market. It couldn't economically justify frequencies to very small cities. But in the markets it served, it offered a simpler, more reliable, often faster experience. The point-to-point model also meant that when weather or operational disruption hit one part of the network, the damage was more contained. A hub operations nightmare scenario, a hub airport shutting down during a major storm, simultaneously stranding tens of thousands of connecting passengers, was less catastrophic in a point-to-point network where each city pair operated more independently. Open seating was another operational choice that looked eccentric to conventional airline thinking, but served specific operational purposes. Southwest did not assign seats. Passengers boarded in groups determined by check-in order, then chose their own seat on the aircraft. This meant no seat assignment system to maintain, no last-minute seat change requests to manage, and, most importantly, faster boarding. Passengers who chose their own seats had an incentive to board quickly and fill in efficiently. Studies of boarding speed consistently showed Southwest's open seating process was faster than most assigned seat competitors. No interline agreements, no baggage transfers to other airlines, no codeshare complexity. Southwest's operation was deliberately simple, and the simplicity showed up in the cost structure. The airline's cost per available seat mile, the standard metric for airline unit cost, was consistently below major network carriers by a significant margin. The culture Herb Kelleher built around this operational model was as distinctive as the model itself and became one of the most studied examples of corporate culture in business school curricula. Kelleher was genuinely unusual as a CEO. He was warm, accessible, and theatrically committed to the proposition that Southwest's employees were the company's most important asset, not as a talking point, but as an operational philosophy. He knew employees' names. He showed up at maintenance facilities at 2 in the morning to thank the night shift. He settled a dispute with a competing airline over an advertising slogan by agreeing to arm wrestle the competitor's CEO, with the winner getting use of the slogan. He wore costumes to company events. He was, by all accounts, entirely himself. The culture he created was built around the idea that happy employees produced happy customers, and happy customers produced financial performance. This sequencing, employee first, customer second, shareholder third, was explicitly articulated and was genuinely unusual in an industry that more typically treated labor as a cost to be minimized. Southwest's labor relations were consistently better than the industry average. The company was heavily unionized, more so than most competitors, but its union relationships were more collaborative than adversarial. Kelleher's approach was to treat unions as partners rather than adversaries, to share financial information openly with employee groups, and to make commitments about employment security that created reciprocal loyalty. The employment security commitment was most visibly demonstrated during the September 11, 2001 attacks. In the days following the attacks, every major US airline laid off thousands of employees. The passenger demand collapse was severe and the financial pressure was extreme. Southwest did not lay off a single employee. It drew on its cash reserves, reduced executive compensation, and maintained its workforce intact. The decision cost money in the short term. It generated extraordinary employee loyalty that paid dividends for years. Southwest had maintained a policy of profit sharing with employees since 1973. In years when Southwest was profitable, which was most years, employees received a percentage of pre-tax profits as cash or stock. The alignment between employee compensation and company performance was direct and visible in a way that most labor compensation structures were not. This culture was not just a feel-good story, it had measurable operational consequences. Employee turnover at Southwest was consistently lower than the industry average, reducing the training costs and institutional knowledge loss that high turnover produces. Employee productivity, measured by revenue per employee, passengers per employee, or flights per employee, was consistently higher than at legacy carriers. The culture that felt warm and human on the outside was also, quietly, highly efficient. The resilience of the Southwest model through external crises was one of its most remarkable demonstrated properties. The September 11 attacks devastated the airline industry. Air travel demand collapsed overnight. Several major carriers, including US Airways and United, filed for bankruptcy. The industry as a whole burned through cash at extraordinary rates in the weeks and months following the attacks. Southwest absorbed the shock. The combination of the strong balance sheet Kelleher had maintained, the no layoff decision that preserved operational capacity for the demand recovery, and the cost structure that generated positive margins at lower load factors than competitors, allowed Southwest to navigate the crisis without bankruptcy, without government bailouts beyond the industry-wide compensation package, and without the structural damage that reshaped its competitors. The 2008 financial crisis and subsequent recession produced a similar pattern. Legacy carriers struggled. Southwest remained profitable. The cost structure that had been built over decades proved genuinely counter-cyclical. When demand softened, Southwest could still cover costs at load factors that would have produced losses at higher cost competitors. Southwest's fuel hedging program provided an additional financial buffer that was particularly visible during the oil price spikes of the mid-2000s. Southwest had systematically hedged its jet fuel exposure years in advance, locking in fuel costs at prices significantly below the market peaks. In 2008, when oil reached nearly $150 per barrel, Southwest was paying dramatically less than competitors for fuel, providing a cost advantage that reached hundreds of millions of dollars in a single year. The hedging program was not consistently profitable over its full history. Hedging at the wrong price resulted in overpaying when fuel prices fell, but it provided insurance against the worst-case scenario of a cost spike at a moment of demand weakness. It was a risk management tool, and it worked as such. The 737 MAX crisis, which began in March 2019 with the global grounding of the aircraft following the Ethiopian Airlines crash, was Southwest's most serious operational challenge in its first 48 years. And it was the first to originate directly from the single fleet type that had been the cornerstone of Southwest's model. Southwest was the largest operator of the 737 MAX in the United States, with 34 aircraft in its fleet at the time of the grounding. The simultaneous removal of all 34 from service with no replacement aircraft available and no other aircraft type in the Southwest fleet that could substitute forced the cancellation of thousands of flights. The financial impact ran into hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue, customer compensation, and operational disruption. The irony was not lost on anyone. The standardized fleet strategy that had been Southwest's greatest structural advantage for 50 years had become, in this specific crisis, a single point of failure. An airline with a diverse fleet could have redistributed flying to other aircraft types. Southwest had no other aircraft type to redistribute to. Southwest ultimately received compensation from Boeing as part of the broader settlement of claims from 737 MAX operators affected by the grounding. The aircraft returned to service in late 2020. Southwest retired its older 737NG variants and rebuilt its fleet around the MAX, eventually operating the aircraft as the backbone of its expansion plans. The MAX crisis did not fundamentally change Southwest's fleet strategy. The economic logic of standardization was still sound, and the MAX grounding was an extraordinary event rather than an argument against single fleet operations. But it demonstrated that the model's structural advantage contained an embedded vulnerability that could not be fully hedged. The December 2022 operational meltdown was a different kind of crisis, one that originated from inside Southwest rather than from an external event, and one that exposed structural vulnerabilities that had been building for years. Winter Storm Elliott hit the United States in the final week of December 2022, producing extreme cold temperatures across a wide geographic area during the peak holiday travel period. Every major US airline was disrupted. Southwest was destroyed. Between December 22 and December 29, Southwest cancelled approximately 16,700 flights, roughly two-thirds of its entire schedule. For several days, cancellation rates approached 90%. The airline effectively shut down its operation for the better part of a week during the highest demand travel period of the year. The scale of the collapse vastly exceeded every other airline's weather-related disruption during the same storm. United, American, and Delta recovered within days. Southwest did not recover for nearly a week. The disparity made clear that Southwest's problem was not the weather, it was Southwest. The root cause was Southwest's crew scheduling system, which had not been updated at a pace commensurate with the growth of the airline's network. Southwest's point-to-point model, which distributes crews across many cities rather than concentrating them at a small number of hubs, creates a complex crew tracking and reassignment problem when disruption hits. In normal circumstances, the distributed model is a resilience advantage. In extreme disruption, when hundreds of crews are out of position simultaneously, the system requires sophisticated real-time tracking and reassignment capabilities to recover. Southwest's crew scheduling technology, specifically the system used to track crew positions and reassign them when disruptions cascaded, was inadequate for the scale of the disruption. When the cascading failures overwhelmed the system's capacity, crew schedulers were reduced to using phone calls to locate and redeploy crew members. The process ground to a near halt. Aircraft were positioned where crews were not. Crews were positioned where aircraft were not. The airline could not find itself. The financial cost was approximately $800 million in revenue impact and customer compensation. Southwest was required to provide full refunds to affected passengers and was investigated by the Department of Transportation. The company's CEO, Bob Jordan, apologized publicly and committed to significant technology investment to modernize the crew scheduling infrastructure. The DOT investigation resulted in Southwest paying $140 million in penalties and customer compensation, the largest airline consumer protection settlement in US history at the time. The December 2022 collapse was not a story about culture or fleet strategy or cost structure. It was a story about a specific operational infrastructure that had not kept pace with network growth. Southwest had grown significantly over the previous decade, adding routes, adding cities, adding frequency, without proportionally investing in the back-end systems required to manage that network when things went wrong at scale. The recovery from December 2022 was Southwest's most difficult corporate challenge since September 11, and unlike September 11, it was a self-inflicted wound rather than an external catastrophe. Customer satisfaction metrics fell sharply. Booking patterns shifted as travelers who had been stranded during the holidays chose competitors for subsequent travel. Southwest's market positioning, the reliable, friendly, affordable airline that had consistently outperformed on operational reliability, had been directly contradicted by the most visible operational failure in its history, precisely when visibility was highest. Southwest committed to the technology investment needed to fix the crew scheduling infrastructure and began implementing it through 2023. But the company also faced a more fundamental strategic challenge. The low-cost model that had been sufficient for decades was under pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. Ultra-low-cost carriers, Spirit, Frontier, Allegiant, had adopted Southwest's cost discipline and applied it even more aggressively, with fees for bags, seat selection, and amenities that pushed their base prices below Southwest's bundled fares. Legacy carriers, restructured through bankruptcy, had reduced their cost bases and improved their operational reliability. The competitive landscape that Southwest had once dominated was more crowded and more sophisticated. In 2024, Southwest faced activist investor pressure from Elliott Investment Management, which acquired a significant stake and pushed for strategic changes, including an end to the open seating policy that had been part of Southwest's identity since its founding. Southwest announced that it would transition to assigned seating and offer premium seating options, a significant departure from the model Kelleher had built. Whether these changes represent a necessary evolution or a dilution of the model that made Southwest exceptional is a question the company is currently living through. What does Southwest's story ultimately tell us? It tells us that a simple idea, fly one aircraft type, fly it fast, keep costs low, treat your people well, can be a genuine competitive advantage for decades if it is executed with consistency and defended with commitment. The Southwest model was not complicated. Its power came from its clarity and from the organizational discipline to resist the complications that growth, competition, and market pressure constantly suggest. It tells us that culture is not a soft supplement to strategy. At Southwest, the culture was the strategy. The willingness of employees to work flexibly, to turn aircraft fast, to absorb disruption with good humor and creative problem solving was the mechanism through which the operational model actually produced its results. Strip the culture out and the model doesn't work the same way. And it tells us that no model is permanent. The environment that made the Southwest model possible, a regulatory landscape, a competitive structure, a technology environment, changes over time. The question every enduring company eventually faces is whether the adaptations necessary to survive the new environment preserve what was genuinely valuable about the original model or hollow it out in the name of evolution. Southwest built something genuinely remarkable. What it builds next is the harder question.